want to just pause for a second. Do
Sure.
you know how I can stop these dingings from happening?
I don't know. Rhyme or free, it doesn't matter to me. It's my bad poetry. Good day, and welcome to My Bad Poetry, a podcast where we take a deep dive into our poems from youth and yesterday, always asking the question, why in the world did I write this? I'm Aaron, and today we have with us an essayist, a poet, a book reviewer, and a teacher who will undoubtedly need to bring all such skills to the table when sharing and analyzing her own old work from the 8th grade. Emily Dillon, welcome to My Bad Poetry.
Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
And I say we, the universal we, I guess, at this moment, but we are thrilled to have you. Dave is unable to join us. He has some sick kiddos, but he sends his regards.
Yeah, and as a new mom myself, I understand the sick kiddos part, so all best to Dave.
Yes. But is there anything in that intro that I might have missed that you want to clarify for our dear listeners?
I don't think so. I was just going to share that it's funny still to be a writer as part of my title, even though that's like, I'm like hired as a teaching professor at a university in a writing department.
Yeah.
But there's always like a little piece of that sense that what a privilege, but also like a little bit of fraudulence feeling, and you've had a lot of guests on this podcast who've written like tons of books and published a ton. And my background sort of started with teaching, and then I kind of moved more into my own creative work. So I tend to resonate and think of myself as a teacher first, and look forward to writing more, as I can, especially post this newborn phase.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Right now, you're just in survival mode.
Yeah.
And I love that you say that, because Dave and I get the worst imposter syndrome ever when we have guests on. So you are not alone. And trust me, you are more a writer than we will probably ever be.
Not at all. I think as a pastor, you're going to be writing a lot.
Yeah. I mean, we
sharing it.
We do write a lot. I mean, Dave and I write a sermon a week. He has a partner in crime, so he writes every other week. But it is a lot of writing, and it's different too.
It is different.
Yeah. But it's definitely a practice that takes a lot of time.
It does. That's a great way of putting it. Like if you're doing it right, I feel like, because I write one-off stuff all the time and put them in journals or in notes or whatever. And I'm like, oh, that's brilliant. But then I come back to it and I'm like, oh, that's not good. It's like I'm going to need some time with this to figure out like what I'm saying or how to improve it or, to understand it in a new way. And I don't always have that time.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And so today we look at the things where we definitely never had enough time.
100%. And it's funny because the poems that I'm going to be reading today, as I had shared with you previously, are from an 8th grade project.
That's amazing.
And it was like a long 8th grade project, like many months involved. And it's funny because some of my classmates, it was supposed to be like a culmination middle school project. And I was in a media communications program. And there were people that made like full videos.
Wow.
And like editing with Final Cut Pro and the hours that they spent doing all this. And I look at my project and I'm like, I'm not sure there was really that much time involved in this, aside from forcing my mom to drive me to the beach to take pictures of the waves that then I wrote ekphrastic poetry about.
Oh, I love this.
Yeah.
Well, there's a lot we are going to be diving into soon. And to get us into the realm of poetry, Dave has graciously provided the poem that he hastily wrote for this week,
Beautiful.
but is unable to read himself. I will read it for us, and then we can have a laugh or two at his expense. This is called An Ode to Coffee. Whether iced or hot, it hits the spot. Needed for morning, helps without warning. Bless me with energy, never caffeine free. Wake me through meetings, eyes open during readings. Keep me in the loop. Always make me happy.
Nice.
Yeah. Straight and to the point.
I thought he was gonna end with the word soup.
Oh,
It rhymed
yes.
with the word loop. And I was like, I don't know how soup is gonna come here. And then it didn't.
Yeah. Well, that's our feedback, Dave. You should have worked soup and loop together. Would have made it 10 times better. Now, how about you? Are you a coffee drinker?
No.
Really?
I get all of my caffeine from chocolate.
Ah, not a bad source.
Yeah. So that's definitely the go-to. And I'm like, I feel like I just have to share this because it is true to who I am, even though I'm horribly embarrassed by it.
That's what this show's for.
Which is that I go to Starbucks every day and I get hot chocolate.
Wow.
It's often like the time of the day where I'm going to like take a moment to myself and do a little bit of work, whether that's emails or sometimes it's writing, but it is very strange. And a lot of my friends like to make fun of me for being childish for drinking hot chocolate instead of coffee or even tea.
Right. Yeah. Here I am drinking hot chocolate at night to calm down. 9 o'clock at night. I'm
glad I'm not the only one still drinking hot chocolate in their 30s.
Oh, it's so relaxing.
Right?
I totally understand that.
I think you're the only person I've ever met that understands, Aaron.
Oh, well, yeah.
What a pleasure.
I actually just Wednesday night, I was like, I need some hot chocolate tonight. So, yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. Well, we've just bonded over this. And now we are going to bond over the fact that you have brought some really bad poems.
Truly horrible.
From your childhood. This is so great. And not only that, you have pictures.
And I feel like that's troubling for a podcast, but you are welcome to upload them.
Okay. They will be shared on our socials. Do you want to do the honors of giving us the title of this work of yours? This culminating collection.
Yeah.
Multiple months of poetry put together.
Multiple months of work and poetry and pictures I put together in 8th grade for a final project. And it's, let me give you an image, dear listener. It's spiral bound with the little plastic spiraling you can get done at Staples.
Mm-hmm.
And the front cover has a collage of, these were pieces of paper from doing a photo album, the types of paper you would get to create a scrapbook.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah.
I created a collage of them on the front. And then there's a picture of a tulip in the middle and that I took. And then beautifully written in, I wish I knew what font this is from Microsoft Word. With something very curly Q. And it says, the nature of expression. Because all of the pictures in the album are of nature.
Ah, clever.
Yes, I liked to be clever. That is certainly part of my personality.
My favorite thing is you've also included a copyright page.
I have.
And it's written in that sort of cursive curly Q type scroll.
The same font.
It's so hard to read.
It's really, I was trying to read it. I was like, this is really difficult. And what is also funny about it, I'm going to make this bigger so I can see it here. But it's hard to read. And I have clearly, ironically, copied the copyright page of a book that I would have had in my bedroom.
Sure, yeah.
Because I made clear that if the language that I used was from a book and it starts, if you purchase this book without a cover, you should be aware that this book is stolen property. And the first thing is, no one is purchasing this book.
Oh, wow.
And apparently, then the next sentence, it was reported as unsold and destroyed to the publisher. There is no publisher.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Wow. First published in May of 2000. Your 8th grade?
I would have been 13.
13.
Yeah.
Wow.
What a good age.
Well, I am so grateful that you are going to read these poems for us, that you're kind of waiving. Yeah, you're waiving the copyright. You're going to share them in public. I hope the publishers are okay with this.
Yeah.
Oh,
I received permission
oh,
just this
good.
morning.
It's laminated.
That is also important.
And you've used those like stylized scissors
I did.
to cut out like so it's like a bumpy.
Yeah. And I don't know if you noticed, they all have different patterns. So I had
Oh.
multiple different scissors for
Oh,
different
that's how you
curly
know it's
patterns.
fancy. That's
Honestly, I feel like there's something to be said about how much of my mom's things I used for this project and how much I feel like I kind of just like used my upper classness to just create this project because like as having been a high school teacher for 5 years, like not many of the students I had would be able to like go to Staples to
right.
like laminate and spiral bound and use all of this fancy paper and fancy scissors. And like most of my work here was just like arranging really bad poems. I put more effort into the construction of the book. And it made it seem really well presented. And if I remember correctly, I got an A on this assignment.
Well,
So
from the other teachers that we've talked to, I've sometimes asked them if a student were to present these poems to you today, what would the grade be? And a lot of them say, they've put the time and effort in. So I could see why you would get an A. But I do also recognize that, yes, this comes from a place of like, you had the time and money for the
yes.
cost of construction alone. It makes it look rather nice for a junior high project.
Yeah, it does. And it's not up to the quality of the photos or the poems.
What are you talking about? This like off-centered shot of a beach? Like it's
Yeah, the
like
poems that I picked for you, I've got like they look like things you would maybe find on like a hotel room wall.
yeah. Yeah, I can see that.
Really
Yeah.
generic.
Now, I already before this beach photo, I'm not seeing the immediate connection. So, let's read popularity here. And let's get to the nature of this expression of popularity.
Okay. Popularity. There are always those waiting, whispering, secretly wanting to be swept up in the midst of the people. There are also those not waiting and not wanting to be swept up in the midst of the people. Which is right? Is either? Why are some not happy with themselves? The people are not always what they seem. The grass is always greener on the other side. I really like that I have ended with a really horrible cliche, but I added a question mark to it.
You subverted expectations there, Emily. You put a statement that people quote so often, but you're questioning it.
I'm questioning. Yeah. To answer your question about the connection to this picture,
Yes.
I think it was the being swept up in the mist. This like idea that the pebbles were people, and like the waves are like pulling at the pebble people. But this is such. I decided, this book has like quite a lot of poems in it, and I spared you all of the haikus, which honestly you should be thrilled about.
Yes,
and
thank you.
and I think I wrote the haikus because they were short, right? That's what every middle school.
Oh, of course, yeah.
But this one is so middle school to me because it's about popularity.
Mm-hmm.
And my experience, as far as I can remember it, right? Like everybody kind of remembers middle school differently. And I actually had friends in high school who like kind of challenged the way that I remembered middle school at one point.
Oh, okay.
Which was helpful, like in retrospect. But I was quote unquote part of the popular group. But I was definitely not like the leader of that. And I definitely made a point of like trying to sit at other tables at lunch. It was like I wanted to be included with everyone. And the only way to do that was to like be part of the popular group, but then try and be friends with other people.
Sure.
Because if you weren't part of the popular group, then you definitely weren't friends with them. Right. So like, and I think this poem is about like that anxiety of like who, like, do you, like, should you want to be friends with,
Yeah.
the quote unquote people who have crowned themselves, right? Nobody else has crowned them popular. It is always that group telling everyone else that they're popular.
Yes.
And I think that's what's going on here. Of course, without me saying anything vulnerable about myself.
Oh, of course not. No, you're sitting above the fray and commenting some people and others. But who is
Have that
right?
in common. I realized, I was like, wow, I have kept it so abstract. And I think honestly, I think the next poem that we're going to read is the only time in this entire book that I use the word I.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Okay. What I love about this first poem here is you're talking about, like, from a junior high perspective, it's those cliques or recess or whatever. And yet you elevate it to like an art in the fact that you've capitalized the people.
Yeah. I knew enough that I was going to use capitalization and formatting to my benefit. But yeah, the people is capitalized.
It's not just like the popular kids. It's
no
the people.
And I wonder, it's funny, like, did I really feel that way then? I like to sort of interrogate it and think, like, and I think I did. Like, I think at the time I didn't really realize that, like, the popular group had deemed themselves popular. Like, I just thought that was, like, the natural way of things.
Sure. Yeah.
And it's only later that I realized, like, how silly that all is, and that there are lives happening outside of the popular group that care very little about, like, the boy drama that we were passing back and forth in notebooks.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
And it's like we thought we were the only ones of the girls that were having, relationships with the boys and getting to know boys. And it's like, nope, that wasn't true either. There were lots of other things happening. We were very self-centered. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
But I do think, like, the question, why are some not happy with themselves? I'm like, oh, was I not happy with myself? I don't even remember.
Yeah, that does open itself up to, like, were you being vulnerable there? Or the more cynical view would be like, well, why does anyone have a reason to be unhappy?
That's probably 100% what's happening.
Oh, no.
Yeah, no. Yeah, which is right, is either why some with themselves. Like, if we read it that way. But I do think the next line, the people are not always what they seem, was me kind of trying to say that, like, that popular group, the people, aren't always, like, as popular put together as they like to make themselves appear.
Yeah, and I think to read that, why are some not happy with themselves, in the light of, like, trying to be sympathetic or vulnerable, those next two lines, people are not always what they seem, and the grass is always greener on the other side. It does seem to allude to the fact that, like, the people might also be experiencing stress and anxiety and worrying about whether they're popular enough or so
that's a good way of putting it. I have to say, what's interesting also about this poem, just from a poetic standpoint, is my form choice. That I have stanzas of 4 lines, and then I have this one line at the end to highlight this cliche question. There's, like, extra emphasis on this.
Yeah, you clearly thought that was, like,
I thought it was brilliant.
An amazing singer.
Sometimes we're wrong, right? That's the lesson of bad poetry, is when you write it, you often don't think it's bad. It takes a moment.
I know. I think that's kind of the fun realization, is the self-seriousness of the moment. It lends itself to all the more, like, cringe later on.
Yeah, and, like, joyful, like, playfulness that, to kind of, like, not take yourself as seriously.
Yeah, to just recognize, like, oh wow, that was a stinker. But, like, you know what? You tried something there. And I mean, you mentioned, like, why are some not happy with themselves? There's a good question in that. And like, it's an eighth grader experiencing complex emotions. And so, yeah, we don't have to take ourselves too seriously. And it does point to how poetry for people.
Yeah. As I'm looking at this,
Hmm.
I think the word mist was really supposed to be amidst, like waiting to be swept up, like in the,
Amidst.
yeah, like waiting to be swept up amidst the people. I wonder if that's what I was trying to say, because it doesn't quite make sense. Like there's a mist of people,
Oh, wow.
right? I think that's what it, to be swept up amidst the people. I think that's
Yeah.
what I was trying to say. And instead I said to be swept up in the mist of the people.
In the midst of the people.
Though now I'm like, maybe that's a happy accident. The mist of the people is kind of interesting.
I didn't question it because I thought with the nature imagery that you play with
Yeah,
your
yeah, yeah.
title, I was like, oh, I mean, yeah, it's a leap, but it is nature. It's kind of
Yeah, yeah,
like
yeah.
the fog of popularity or
No,
the
I don't
mist.
think I thought of that.
I was also thinking that was my one guess at a connection between the beach picture. Because sometimes when waves crash, there's that mist that comes up.
Yeah, maybe. I
Maybe.
think it was dumber than that.
Okay.
I think it was just being swept with the wave imagery.
Ah,
Yeah,
a nice little happy accident.
yeah.
Uh,
Poetry's full of them.
it is, yeah. I do love looking at your style. You got your four-line stanzas, and all of the punctuation shows up at the end. Question mark, question mark, question mark, ellipses. Question mark.
Question mark. Yeah, that is a great point. I have to say, even for my poetry today, I'm like, I have not come to a deep acceptance of my relationship with punctuation yet.
Neither have I.
Yeah,
I
because
never know what I'm doing.
I tend to be, if anything, an over punctuator
Okay.
where I like want to punctuate it exactly as I would if there were no line breaks.
Okay. Okay.
But then I'm like, why do I have line breaks? and and so I have there's a poem that I wrote that was published a couple years ago now, but in a literary magazine where I honestly like flipped back and forth in the editing process between it being prose and poetry because
Oh,
it was like the line breaks almost were just there to help me try and figure out which words I really didn't need and which I could keep. But like
interesting.
the lines as rhythm, I wasn't really using. Like I used punctuation for rhythm more.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't. Maybe it's more that I haven't figured out my relationship with line breaks. That
Hmm.
so there's early indicators of that here. And
And you still are today.
I still,
Oh, oh wow! I just scrolled down to the next one. And there's an interesting choice for this one.
yeah.
How about we
I think
read?
I might need your help to read this one
Oh, okay, okay.
if you're willing.
I can guess how you want this read. Sure. Yeah. What do you want
Let's
this?
not talk about it at all and see if the
If I
way
interpret
I
this
want it
right?
read is in fact
Okay.
what you're
Let's
expecting.
dive in. The title is too similar.
And I feel like we need to include the fact that the picture here is at sunset on a lake, and there are two geese, and one is following the other.
Probably in need of a little more exposure. It's kind of dark.
Yes, yes, agreed.
Okay.
And the title "Too Similar" is the number two, TWO, and there's a question mark at the end of it, which I have a lot of question marks in my work in this 8th grade piece. But also, I don't know what I'm asking there. Too similar? Meaning, like, are these two similar? I guess.
We will find out together.
Okay. Here is the reading of the poem. I want
I want
to create
to create
a ripple in a life
a ripple in a life
so effective,
so effective.
the life
The life
is changed.
is changed.
Can anything be
Can anything be
more beautiful
more beautiful
than friends
than friends
who love
who love
and think
and think
alike?
alike?
Question mark.
Question mark.
Because I put them on their own line breaks. I didn't
Oh,
even include
yeah.
them at the end with alike.
No, that was the decision I saw when I scrolled down. Just two like hanging question marks at the end there.
I also feel like the first, like the sentence, there are two sentences in this poem, right? I want to create a ripple in a life so effective the life has changed. That seems ultimately very different in topic from the second sentence. Can anything be more beautiful than friends who love and think alike?
Yeah. Reading the two sentences without the echo, or
Yes.
whatever, however you want to describe this structure, that first line is beautiful. I mean,
Is it?
yeah, I want to create a ripple in a life so effective the life has changed. I mean, you want to be a part of someone's life so much so that you've changed them, hopefully for the better. I mean, it's a little ambiguous here, but
It is ambiguous, but yes, I do think and like I said, this is the only line I think in this entire book where I use the pronoun I. So it's interesting that this line is perhaps the most directly vulnerable.
Yeah.
Like, here's what I want. Like, I want to impact people.
Yeah. You want to be a force for good.
Yeah. Or even if like you said, it doesn't really say good here. I think it's like that 8th grade person just like wanting to be noticed, right? Like, I want to create a ripple in these other people's lives so that they're changed. Like, I want to be part of something.
Yeah.
Okay.
Important question here.
Mm-hmm.
Were you a fan of Wicked, the musical?
Honestly, no.
Okay.
But I was a musical kid.
Okay.
And I did musicals from elementary, I think I started in elementary school, through high school. I was like in musicals every year, both outside of school and in school. So I definitely knew of Wicked, but I never saw it. I was not the chosen one that got to go see it.
Okay.
And so I didn't know it super well. And to this day, I've never seen it or read the book.
Oh, fascinating. Okay.
Rent was more my 90s play. Yeah.
Strong choice. I just, that first line is it's giving me there's the song For Good.
Yeah, I do know that one.
Because I knew you. That it's giving me For Good vibes.
I've changed for the better.
Exactly. Yes. And it's all about like the ripple effects of knowing one another for a moment. So
that honestly could have been in my psyche here.
It came out in 2003.
After school, while I was writing these poems, I would have been in dressing rooms with musical theater kids laughing Wicked.
Oh, sure.
Who knows?
My shall we say critique of this is actually an answer to your title. Too similar? It's the echo.
It's too similar.
It's too similar. It kind of runs its course. It's like, oh, I see what you're doing. Oh, it's the entire poem.
I tell you, the only memory that I have of I only have 2 memories of things that my teachers said about this project, because you actually had like meetings, with the different teachers about it. And I had, as far as I can remember, I had a meeting with the English teacher about the poems. And then I set up a meeting with like the communications media teacher about the photos.
Okay, sure.
And all I remember is the media teacher saying that I had an interesting composition of my photos, that like the angles that I was taking things were like interesting and exciting. And I remember the English teacher, all I can remember, and again, who knows if this is actually a correct memory,
sure, is
that for this poem, she was like, do you want to do that? And all I remember saying was, yes. Like, it is about the voices speaking back and forth to each other. And she like let me have it.
Oh, wow.
But I kind of, it's interesting now as I think of myself as a teacher, again, who knows if that memory is actually correct, but
Sure.
if I were an 8th grade teacher and this was brought to me and somebody said that, like I want them talking back and forth to each other, I think I would push the student a little bit more, you know, like, well, why would they be saying the same thing? And like, you know, is there some way that we can differentiate the voices, even if you want them to say very similar things? Or can we add something about to answer this question? You know, like whatever.
Yeah, those are the perfect questions to keep the echo or the format in a different way, because this is just there's no shape that I can. It's just kind of a straight down the line, different sides of the page.
Yep.
But even then, I was hoping as we were reading it together that at some point my voice would differentiate, and it never did.
And it never does. Yeah, because there is no difference here. And that's like, it's kind of a good lesson, I think, about like what makes good poetry, right? Which is like, it's like you start on a thread or I start on a thread when I'm working on a poem, and I feel an urge to go in one direction. And I have to be able to let it open itself up in a new direction, right? And if there isn't like a turn or a leap, you know, we have all these phrases in like the analysis of poetry that we use, but if it doesn't make a move, then it feels kind of dead.
Yes.
And this poem is a poem that didn't make a move, right? It started in one place and ended in the same place.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's why it's bad.
I do like the picture connection. Did you snap the pictures and then write the poems? Or did you write the poems and then go, Mom, I need to go out to the beach and snap some pictures?
No, I took photos of things without planning what I was taking photos of. I was like, I want to go out in nature and take photos of things.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to use them to inspire poetry.
Okay.
And I don't think anyone had ever taught me what like ekphrastic meant.
Right.
So I don't know where that impulse came from, except to make the project longer.
That isn't vital.
Yeah. And I think the doubling of this poem was probably to make the poem longer.
Honestly, I think it would be better if it wasn't doubled. If it was those two sentences broke into 2 stanzas.
Yes. I mean, there's a lot that would need to happen here. Again, like this, and this is what's interesting about poetry is like it took me a really long time to learn this, like halfway through my MFA program, that like you can't start a poem knowing what it's about. Like you can think you know what it's about, but you have to keep going and keep writing it until you have ended up in a new place.
Yes. Yeah.
Or it feels dead. And so these poems in this book, all of them were things where it was like, oh, this picture inspired me to do this. So I'm now going to proclaim this thing and I'm going to write it out. And they're all like little proclamations. They're not poems.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's get to this last one because this is a very lengthy title.
I honestly, when I read this back, I was like, ooh, look at me being a little bit experimental with my title.
Yeah.
Again, cliche. And again, a question.
Question everything, Emily.
Yeah, and that was and is a huge key personality trait. I was 100% asked any of my friends, elementary through college, if they were in a class with me, who in the class asked the most questions of the teacher. It was me. I'm the problem. And I honestly, like as an adult in like workplace settings, have to like tamper down my questions in meetings. Like, okay, I'm going to write all of my questions down on paper and then later edit them and ask the appropriate person at another time when I've already decided which ones I don't need the answers to.
You know, that's a skill. Good on you.
A lot of years. But here in 8th grade, I did not have that skill. So this poem begins with the title, "When a tree is chopped down in a forest and there's no one around to hear it, does it still make a noise?" That's the title.
Where would you have come up with that question?
No one had ever heard. I know.
Wow,
We have never heard of that
I'm
question.
just blown away by
Blown away by the question.
Let's see if the poem lives up to that.
Okay, here we go. And the picture is of two trees in the backyard that I grew up in. And I am looking up at the two trees from the bottom. So the picture's composition is mostly like the trunks. Like,
and a nice parallel. I mean,
and they are very parallel going up.
I like this shot. This is a nice shot.
Yeah. Okay. So here we go. As a king they stand, looking down upon the world, surveying their land, outreaching hands, growing deep down into the ground, spreading, sweeping its roots as the world around envies the wisdom they have found. How could such things crumble and be destroyed, expire, as the world grumbles and the dirt groans and mumbles? Oh, how to question why someone would chop them down? Would the answer be a lie? Would they possibly deny? And yet they still are tall, proud, and free. It should be the same for all, so ears may forever hear bluebirds' calls. This one has a little bit more of an arc to it.
Okay, yeah.
I will give it that. My main complaint is the pronoun usage.
Okay.
There's so many pronouns, and some of them are misused. Like, growing deep down into the ground, spreading, sweeping its roots. It should be their roots. I'm talking about two trees.
Yeah.
So it starts to get confusing. And then I have words like things that are very vague.
Mm-hmm.
So there's just a lot of its and theys and their and, never really sure what I'm talking about.
Yeah, it's like you were reaching for a metaphor, but not quite sticking it. It's just...
Reaching like the trees, I dare say.
Honestly, this gives me like Ozymandias and the Lorax vibes.
Oh, that's high praise.
Like, well, okay. Yeah, like smashed together
like
and
something is crumbling, the downfall of this civilization.
Yeah, a king looks out.
Yeah.
And yet it's like lamenting the trees. I mean, it's...
I would have read the Lorax. I would have not read Ozymandias.
Yeah, that's fair.
I was a very anxious child, always was.
Okay.
And I think briefly some of my like death anxiety is kind of creeping in here.
Sure.
Right? How can these like things that are so huge crumble and be destroyed? People would chop them down. There's this was the year 2 years after September 11th, too, which was like very strong in my psyche because I lived in Washington, D.C.
Sure.
Right outside of Washington, D.C., but all of my like friends' parents, we were like the suburb over the line. So everybody worked in the city.
Yeah.
And that day was like very much in my mind. And I think these two trees kind of look like the Twin Towers. And I think some of the language in here about freedom and kings, like some of this, I think, is maybe anxiety reflection on that.
Yeah, and crumbles. I mean, now that you say that, I think the post 9/11 anxiety that we experienced in our generation has come out sideways in a lot of different ways. But
and this is the best version.
This might be the healthiest version. I think this is, yeah, you are dealing with some big questions and that like death anxiety, and when your reality is just shaken to its core and you don't know what to expect for these things that we take for granted to just disappear in a moment. Those are huge questions.
Yeah. And it's interesting. In college, I like talked about September 11th with some of my friends, and it was fascinating the different experiences people had because sixth grade, which is when it happened for me, right at the beginning of sixth grade, it's a formative age where some people are still very much like children and not totally aware of what's going on around them in the world because you're just coming out of elementary school. But some people, and I think I was always kind of attuned into the news that would be playing and stuff, you're starting to get these like inputs and trying to figure out what they mean. And it was interesting in college. I felt like the people who lived near Washington, D.C. or New York were much more influenced.
Sure.
As sixth graders than people in other parts of the country who might not have been able to make it as concrete for themselves.
Yeah.
But honestly, I need to be totally transparent. I realized this when it came out of my mouth talking to you. Like, I did not realize, I didn't even think about this like last night when I was looking at this poem.
But it makes so much
It makes
sense.
so much sense.
Yeah, that's amazing. Now, as amazing as that is, what is going on with this? Just remind me if I'm forgetting a standard style of poetry, but an ABAA rhyme scheme?
I was making stuff up.
Okay,
yeah. It feels very awkward.
It does.
I was reading it to myself last night, and I didn't realize that it rhymed until like the last stanza. I was like, wait, what? And so it feels super awkward. But I think part of it's the rhythm. The rhythm is really awkward.
It doesn't have like a limerick type feel. It doesn't lend itself to rhyme. Yeah.
The line breaks problem again. Because it's like what that line, as the world around envies the wisdom they have found. It's like really the emphasis there feels like it should be like on the word envies, as the world around envies the wisdom they have found. So it doesn't feel like it rhymes, even though I have like made it so that the end of the line rhymes.
Yeah. The only way that you could tell these are supposed to rhyme be cuts where you did.
Yeah.
If you were just reading it, those rhymes do not stand out.
No.
Especially with that clunky B word. I mean, in each stanza, you got world roots. So, yeah.
And it's like, who knows why I did that? I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's poetry in 8th grade. Something has to rhyme somewhere.
That is true. Yes. It's kind of amazing that I didn't have more rhyme. Like, it makes sense that I had it, but I'm like, I'm looking through this book right now. Like, I don't think any of the other poems rhyme. It's
really?
Like, I think the rhyme felt limiting to me. It was like I wanted to get all my thoughts out.
Yeah. And you had some good thoughts.
I mean, some of them, like, these are the ones that at least I felt like there was something in them. Man, some of the ones that I didn't send you, I'm like, I just put words on a page from a thesaurus. Or the haikus that are just truly just a description. Like, the moon is round and full sort of thing. And then that's the whole thing.
Well, that's kind of like what Dave and I call definitional poetry, where it's like you're trying to be poetic, but all you're doing is just giving like a dictionary definition of something.
There's a lot of that.
Yeah, there is.
That is it's very much. It does feel like a child thing because you're trying to define a word that is new to you, but not new to anyone else.
Right. Yeah, and you think you're being so profound because you're like finding truth or what you think is truth in the world, and you're like, oh wow, and then you write it and you look back and you're like, oh how adorable.
It's funny, like listening to some of your poems, because yours were high school primarily, right?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah, and I don't know, I kept journals in high school, so I would have to like go back and look. This one was like an obvious easy pull for me because it's like a thing in my like an actual collected book of poems. But it's interesting even hearing the difference between like this 8th grade self and like your poems in high school, because the high school stuff that you guys were reading reminds me more of like what I was doing in like my freshman college stuff, where it's like this almost like ironic persona that you're cultivating. There's no irony in any of this 8th grade stuff.
Oh no, this is very sincere.
Very earnest.
Yes.
And I just haven't adopted that, irony yet, that you sort of learn is part of the artistic voice.
Sure. Yeah.
As a teenager. But yeah, this is like, I thought this was, I don't even know if I thought it was great. I think I just thought it was.
Yeah.
It's just like, oh yeah, these are the poems. These are the poems. And I don't have any memory of making edits to them. I'm sure I went for the meeting.
Are you sure you want to do it this way?
Yeah,
yes.
This is the poem.
I wrote a poem. It's a poem.
Well, and it's funny because even I took college poetry classes. I was not a creative, I was an English major, but I wasn't a creative writing concentrated English major, but I did take poetry and wrote some then. And even then I feel like I don't have a lot of memory of like doing revisions. Like the poems that were good were the ones that just sort of like by happenstance came out pretty good. And there was only like one or two, right? Because
Sure.
that's not how poetry usually works. And I sat in workshop after workshop, critiquing other people's work. I don't know if any of us made changes to things. and then it wasn't, like until I'm like in this MFA program after teaching for several years. I had two careers by that point. I go into the MFA program literally just to get a higher salary at my teaching job.
Sure.
At the time,
Yeah.
because you just needed like a master's, I needed another degree.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, this sounds fun. And then that really like changed everything for me. But yeah, it was like, it really took me to then to be like, oh, the whole point of this is revision. And yeah, you can write a bunch of stuff down. And maybe once in a blue moon, once every couple years, you'll get something that comes out that's like kind of a moment of clarity.
Yeah.
But the real work is the revision.
Mm-hmm.
And this goes back to what we were saying before. That takes time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And sometimes it's time at the desk, and sometimes it's just time living.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because you'll have an idea and then you'll live a day with that idea in your head and you'll realize, oh, I'm kind of missing the mark on this idea. Let me revise this before it hits the page.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of time, we might.
Your transitions are epic.
Oh, thank you.
Excellent.
Dave, did you hear that?
Yep.
I'm keeping that in the final cut.
Please do, because he likes to make fun of your transitions, and I have heard that in other episodes. And I would like to say that I am here for the corny transitions that turn on the dime of one word. That's usually what they're doing.
Thank you.
It's great.
Here at My Bad Poetry, we end each week with the words of a true poet. So would you be willing to read for us another one of your poems?
Yeah. I know you had put in the notes that there was one that really spoke to you, the teaching English.
It's one of your newest flash works.
Yeah.
I would love to hear that
I was
again.
kind of interested in reading. That one did sort of come out more formed, though it was like part of a larger work. And then the revision was really like finding its form as a separate piece.
Mm-hmm.
There's one where was very much like that, where I learned the process of like revision, where I like started with one thought and then I like had a revelation and I thought that the poem was done. And then I had a second revelation.
Nice.
And so and it's about parenting, or it was the anxiety of having a child before I had one.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to read that one if that's okay.
Sure.
And it's called Pink Prose. And this is the one that was kind of at different times in the revision process was a poem. And then at other times was flash.
Oh, sure.
And sort of ended up as like a weird mix of the two.
Perfect.
So Pink Prose. A man enters the coffee shop and I wonder, does he wear any pink unseen? A pink flush barrette bounces before him, gripping like the hands of a baby girl on hair, fleshy fingers roly-poly among baubles and stiff braids. In front of the peach sugar packets, a two-stepping unicorn. Can you see it? It's the color of sugar and fuchsia. It's the pink of white skin under yellow light. It's pink, the color of tea levitating in the pitcher. I tried to ignore it. But next to me, Post-it notes slip thin like tongues from Teacher Edition, Module 4. Pink is pedantry, and a baby pink felt pen underlines. I didn't see it before, but there it is. Pink on iced coffee straws. Or are they white? No matter, my eyes see it now. Also the pink of the skin on the back of my thumb. Is there, after all, pink in the lines of this prose, woven into the stitch of its fabric? Suddenly, everything is pink. All the orange pink and brown pink and for sure maroon pink, and I can't unsee it. My closed eyes color pink and I claw at them, pink nails pulling at long pink scars, hoping for red but exposing only the basil smell of pink, clean pink, that warm soap of pink, and hearing the coined giggle of pink. And oh my lord, if I have a daughter, perhaps I will strangle her, classy and prim-like, clutching my diamonds, probably in the tub like all those other mothers, the ones who put their children underwater, running out their cheeks until they went pink, until their skin was pink with warm water, until the blood flushed to pink, then purple pink, and looking down at hands, pink with effort and resistance, start a new bath, add salts of eucalyptus, lay back to murderous solitude. Or maybe I will love her, so much so that my skin will burst into pink bubbles of champagne, reaching towards the surface so swiftly, my pink lungs explode, saturated with daughter. Yeah, I wrote that before I had my daughter, before I was pregnant with her.
Yeah.
A couple years.
Oh, that's incredible. You wrote it a couple years before having a daughter.
Yeah, so I was writing, I don't even remember, I'd have to go back and look at the drafts, but I was writing all this pink stuff.
Sure.
And I don't even think I got to the daughter part. And I brought it to like a workshop, and my poetry professor was like, this is obviously about having a child.
Wow.
He's just like, this, like, just write the next line. So I went back and I wrote that murderous solitude part, like, oh, maybe this is a poem of fear about being so overwhelmed by a child, and just that feeling of like, I can't do it, and wow, I'm gonna like throw my child against a wall, like all the stories that you hear. And then that's where I thought the poem ended. And then I like read it, I like sat with it just like I think I don't even know if it was a full day or something, but I was like, that doesn't feel like the end. But it felt like the safer ending, just to like be like, well, this crazy thing. And then that next final step of, oh, actually the thing I'm afraid of is like loving her so much that it like changes my whole worldview. And that joy as fear, which ultimately this poem was like very much a revelation for me just about myself, that like, wow, it's really joy that's hardest for me to feel. Often the scariest.
Yeah, I love that aspect of that final turn. It'll be the pink like champagne when I look at her, because it's that moment of parenthood that truly just changes everything. I know that sounds cliche, but man, and it's terrifying. It's terrifying to think that another person's life is in your hands, and forever your identity is changed in theirs.
Yeah, I don't really like it. I think that's your friend last night. Like I think I wanted parenthood to be like adding an identity as opposed to like changing previous ones.
Yeah.
And it's definitely reformulating things.
Capture that very well.
Thanks.
Is that published anywhere?
Yeah, it was published with the online magazine Twin Pies Literary.
Nice. Okay. This has been My Bad Poetry.
Now go write some of your own bad poetry.
Would be willing to come back on, because it sounds like you have a treasure trove.
Oh, I was going to say, yes, when you need new ones.
The nature of expression.
We do a whole episode on my haikus. You know, and it's funny, there was a poem that I thought about including. Rhyme free doesn't matter. It's my